I would almost guarantee you, if you start breaking it down and talking to CrossFit competitors and you start talking about like what they really did to prepare themselves mentally for that kind of stuff, and it's something they've been doing for a long time, it became a routine. It's no different than watching a batter step into the batter's box and they got this little 3-second routine they got to get themselves ready and focused.
All right, welcome back to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Lou Aviv in San Diego, California. And today I'm joined by the founder of Team Elite Performance, Dean Whellams. Dean, thanks for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time and making our schedules work, and look forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. Can you give us a little bit of an idea for the listeners about what you do and what it is that teams kind of contact you to do?
Sure. I think I'll start that answer with what I don't do. Although the name Team Elite Performance certainly sounds like team building, and when I start talking to people like, oh, you do team building, and we've almost tried to kind of stay away from that catchphrase, I guess, almost because team building's almost gotten like a negative connotation these days.
Yeah, I think of people doing the trust fall.
There you go, trust falls, and that kind of thing, and in fact, I was doing a podcast recently, and I told the guy, I said, yeah, you want to get a lot of people at work to call in sick, tell them you're going to do team building the next day.
Yeah.
And see how many people actually show up. So what we really focused on was what I would call people building. And so it's really nothing more than kind of going back to that definition of success that we talked about is, giving people a chance, the opportunity to be their very, very best. And I'm a huge believer that everybody, having whether it's coaches, mentors, partners, people that push us. I think that's a win in life. I mean, you look at people that are successful. That is certainly one of those foundational things. Is they surround themselves with people who are not just good at what they do, but better than what they do, so they can kind of model those behaviors.
Yeah, sure. So, other than team or outside of team building, when you're talking professional development, do you come up against a lot of we'll say friction in that area too? Because I think from what I've seen, there's a lot of people that are not open to that unless they're an entrepreneurial type or they have a reason to be.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer that with kind of an example. One of the, sessions that I've done, it deals with a lot of public speaking, which, as we all know, it's kind of one of the biggest fears of people. And it's interesting. I do a class on leadership, and I'll get business people and everything in there, and and a lot of them will say, well, what's the one thing you want to get better at? And okay, sometimes that's kind of an easy out answer. They want to get better at speaking in public. But then I have a public speaking class, and you know how many people sign up for that?
Not many.
Yeah. So back to your question. So depending on whether it's friction or just fear, there's no doubt. I mean, that's why, most of what I do is either with high school age, college age, younger people. And honestly, it's because they don't have quite as many walls. So as we get a little bit older, we tend to build up these walls and then going and doing something out of our comfort zone, which is, as we all know, that's where we grow. That gets scary. Really scary sometimes. So yeah, there definitely can be some pushback or some friction just because people are afraid of it.
Yeah, for sure. I went through a public speaking course, and I don't know how true this is, but the instructor said that public speaking is it's the biggest fear in America, second only to the sound of a shotgun.
Which makes perfect sense. And
Yeah.
And it's interesting too. I was doing a session with a company I work with here in town, and we were talking about this concept of public speaking and how it really is a lot of different. It's rated as kind of the number one fear, but the reality is that people don't actually have a fear of public speaking. What they've really got fears of is fears of rejection, fears of embarrassment, fears of not saying the right thing, fears of people not accepting me, fears of lack of confidence, lack of belief in myself. And then what we don't do is we don't speak in front of people. And I use the analogy like we really don't raise our hand anymore. I mean, you think about little kids. My daughter's is in kindergarten right now, and I got to go in and speak to her class for 30 minutes. And I walked in the door and I said, hey, I didn't even tell them what we were going to do. I said, I need a volunteer. Well, 30 little hands went up, like freaking out, not all excited, and they didn't even know what we were going to do,
Yeah.
right? But if I sit in front of a group of adults and I say, hey, I need a volunteer, not very many hands go up.
Well, they haven't had a lifetime of rejection yet, right?
Well, that's exactly what it is. So you hit it right on the head. So then what do? We don't raise our hand. We start to pull back. So yeah, because why? Not because we're really afraid to speak in public, but we're afraid of those other things. And then what we don't do is speak in public. I was working with a high-level college baseball coach, and he was talking about that. And he said, yeah, I've got a fear of speaking in front of people. And so I asked him that question. I said, Coach, what is it really? Let me give you some really common ones. And he sat and listened. And he's like, He's like, yeah, I really got like a fear that people aren't going to listen to me or take me seriously. And I told him, I said, if we don't deal with that, I said, I can give you all the public speaking skills in the world, but if we don't deal with that, then all that other stuff's going to be, it's going to be really kind of fake and it's not going to be real. But if you deal with that belief that maybe people aren't going to listen to you, you got a lot better chance of becoming a much better speaker and influencing people, especially in a position like that where you've got, lots of influence over people.
Sure. You mentioned the value of pushing people to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
In 2017, age of social media, I think everybody says that, right? Like there's memes everywhere. It's like, comfort zones or, it's like that's everyone pushes people to get out of their comfort zone. I can't think of a meme right now. How do you push people to get uncomfortable though? What are the tactics that you actually use? Because that's a pretty hard thing to get people to do.
Sure. It certainly starts with, you asked the question earlier about do you get some friction? And, one of my jobs early on, if I'm doing I'm going to call it like a session or a program with people is to, I always say when people show up to any kind of a training, a session, there's always three people there. There's the people that they're excited to be there. It's kind of the 10-80-10 rule. There's some excited, then there's some in the middle that are kind of like, let's see how this goes. Let's see what this is about. And they're kind of moving up and down the spectrum. And then there's that, the 10% that absolutely positively don't want to be there at all.
Right.
And so my job early on is to as much as I can move that 10% out of that kind of fear place that they don't want to be there. So that's the first thing. So, how do I do that? It's through different activities, through different conversations. I mean, anything I do is pretty active based. It's not a lot of, I guess, what I call lecturing. It's not a lot of sitting and listening. But at the same time, I don't want to do, when we talked earlier about this whole team building thing. I'm going to kind of branch off onto something else here, but somebody was asking me recently, we were talking about like the components of like what groups do for team building, right? People building. And we said, well, there's kind of like you said, there's the trust falls and that kind of thing, right? We do activity, we learn about each other, great. Or you could even say we get together in a room and we build things out of Legos and we talk about how we communicated. And okay, so that's one way to do it.
Sure.
And then I think another way to do it falls under, whether it's, Myers-Briggs or Briggs-Myers, whatever it's called, or the DISC profile, there's all these things out there that are about our personalities and, how we interact with each other, which is all really good information, really, really powerful to learn. And then I said, I think more what I do is kind of the third arm of that, which is what I call relationship development, which is actually giving people a chance just to get to know each other. Because, I don't know about you, but I know me personally, I've got I want to know a lot more about you when I know you as a person. And then we can move on to the other stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of understanding people's stories and where they're coming from and knowing that there's always a reason that people do things. So I guess that's a really long answer to your short question. But yeah, it's a lot of it's activity type stuff. And it gets them up and speaking, which goes back to this whole number one fear. When we get up and we talk, all of a sudden we start to be a little more comfortable when we get through that fear. Because if we can do that, we can do just about anything.
Yeah. And when you start talking Myers-Briggs and all these different things, the reason I'm asking is because I think a lot of people, so-called team building coaches or whatever, a lot of times I don't know why I put that in quotes. A lot of times they can say something and people can intellectually know that, right? But
yes.
Actually understanding and actually applying it to life, that's much more difficult. No
question. I mean, there's, one of my favorite people that I've been to see him live and I read a lot of his stuff is Anthony Robbins. And, there's some people that love him to death and some people I think because he's so over the top that like it freaks him out.
Sure.
And what I always tell people about him is I'm like, take all that out of the equation. He's a phenomenal teacher, in my opinion. I mean, he does just what you said. He can take this concept and then break it down into a tangible thing that somebody can actually do. Mm. Some kind of a personal development thing, whatever it is. So, but yeah, you're exactly right. You got to move it into a thing they're actually up and doing and experiencing rather than just sitting there and talking about it.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in wanting to do this in the first place?
My first thing was kind of twofold. I went through some of my own kind of personal growth in my life when I was about 26, 27 years old and had my first kind of significant relationship that didn't go great. I actually started seeing a counselor and really what that brought in was this whole concept of just self-learning and self-growth, which I'd never, in 25, 26 years, had never been exposed to anything like that. So that was it was a paradigm shift,
mm-hmm.
Sudden, wow, like this is all kind of me.
Yeah. It's unfortunate how that gets stigmatized just to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you mentioned going to a counselor, talking to a therapist, and everybody's like, moving for the exit doors as quick as they can. There's a good friend of mine who's a major league manager. He was telling me that, a lot of these teams nowadays have a sports psychologist or somebody on staff. And he's like, And he's like, it's such a bummer, just what you said. It's this great position, could be super helpful, but the stigma is there's something wrong with me. Why can't I go figure this crap out on my own? Why do I need to go get help? And then asking for help is being vulnerable, and it's this downward cycle that people don't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I personally come from a special operations background. So I would say we operate at a very high level, at a very high team level.
Sure.
But still, like, people are so when you bring up professional development or I guess maybe like personal development, people get really skittish around that and wanting to do it.
Well, yeah. Then all of a sudden, you go back to what we do. I mean, and really this whole team building thing. I mean, if there's anything we really do, it's really people building. And because we do it at the same time, it becomes team building. That's really where the team building happens. Whereas, where it's not, the exercises or things like that. It's that we're all doing this kind of personal growth. But yeah, you're right. It's got a, whatever you want to call it, sounds kind of touchy feely, sounds scary, sounds, pretty. It's uncomfortable. Bottom line, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. So the last time that we were going to do one of these interviews, I think you had to fly out to Michigan.
Yes.
So when you do that, what exactly are you doing for them?
And it varies depending on. Usually, I'll go in with specifically the sports teams. 2 and 3 times a year. Usually, a coach will have me come in early in the season, and that one's all about like developing the culture and kind of helping them define like who they want to be as a team and who they want to be as individuals. And so there's that part, and then usually the second couple are more follow-ups. They're just kind of reminders of some of the stuff that we talked about. They're much shorter sessions. I mean, those first ones are, maybe over a 2 or 3 day span. I'll probably spend up to like 10 hours with the team, broken down in small chunks. And then these follow-up ones are definitely shorter ones. So it's, maybe an hour, it could be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, it could even be 30 minutes. We might just do some little quick thing that anchors in something we did before. And then, kind of just gets them ready because they're in the middle of the season. They don't have a lot of extra time, put it that way. Yeah,
for sure. And I saw, I guess it would be out of competition, but you only work with one team per conference or something like that, I saw.
Yeah, that's exactly. We just kind of came up with. We came up with internally of realizing that, these coaches and players, they're kind of letting us into their world. I always talk about when I get to go into a locker room. I consider it a very sacred space.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those places. Nobody else knows what goes on in there, and to get a little snapshot into there. And I just know that no matter how fantastic these athletes or coaches thought this was, if the next week. Using Michigan as an example, if the very next weekend I was going to be in East Lansing with Michigan State, probably don't get quite the.
Yeah, makes sense.
I just know me as an athlete, as competitive as I was. I mean, I'd be like, that was awesome. But then if I knew that, like, that would, there's just we're competitive, man.
Yeah, that would definitely diminish your thought process on the effectiveness.
Yeah, also. And I never wanted to be a consultant that went around and worked with anybody. I mean, it's got to be a really, really good fit. And some of these coaches I've gotten to know, essentially give me almost like keys to the place, and I get to go in and I get to watch them in their coach meetings, and they'll listen to them breaking down strategies and X's and O's, and that's kind of the agreement is I'm not gonna take any of that internal information and share it with anybody else. That's their stuff they're working on, and I might help them fine tune it, but in terms of because a lot of that stuff is at that level it's pretty competitive.
Sure. So when you're improving upon an organization, what sort of methodologies or frame of references are you teaching from?
If I understand the question right, and this is such a buzzword these days, but this whole kind of culture building, kind of what do we stand for around here? Mm-hmm. But methodologies I would use, and that's really the core of it is culture building, and then the methodology would be, just a real simple. Where are we at, and where are we going, and what's it going to take to get there? And where they're kind of developing their own roadmap of, what are things they can do, back to your thing, like some actual tangible things they can do on a day-to-day basis to actually kind of support and uphold that, so that if, whether it's a recruit coming into one of these organizations or whether it's a company or, I do a lot of work at schools, so when you walk in there, culture is a thing that you feel. I got to believe, not being a armed forces person, but in special ops, there was a culture around there, based on the behavior and the way people did things.
Sure.
It was very, very clear and very defined. When somebody was outside of that, it didn't fit well.
Right. So you mentioned, what are those actual things though that you're doing, I guess, to really improve upon culture? Because that is kind of a buzzword. I'm curious, like when you're working with an organization, or if people are listening to this and they are currently working in an organization, which all of us obviously are, like what are those like tangible things like that you're going to actually do to kind of help?
Let me ask this. So when you're asked that, like, what are like some of the actual processes I use with them? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. In terms of the culture stuff, I wouldn't say that's anything it's really just divided about conversations. I mean, really just getting people, I'm kind of facilitating them, but I'm kind of leading them through, a series of processes in terms of that is nothing more than just discussions, where they're kind of getting a chance to sit and, I'll use the catchphrase, do it by design and not by default. So getting really, really clear with it, but it's really nothing more than me sitting with the coaches in a room for as long as the brain can take it. I mean, I was with Arizona baseball last summer, so I went in with the coaches and spent like 3 hours one day, and then but it's about turning the cell phones off. So it's not so much about like what I'm doing with them, probably it's kind of like how we do it, if that makes sense. But it really was nothing more than just sitting in a room with a whiteboard and and then mixing in some little activities and stuff to keep the energy going. But it really was just a lot of just conversations and giving them a chance to just focus on I guess the culture that they want to continue to create. And it would be no different than what a business. I mean, if you were to compare it in a business world, and I probably do 20% of the stuff I do is within kind of in the corporate world. It's kind of just a high level strategic plan and just saying, okay, where are we at right now? What do we want to do moving forward? But just giving them a chance to talk in there. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but it really is nothing more than that.
Yeah. So I mean, I would imagine when you're working with an organization and you're working through something like culture, there's a certain amount of finesse that just has to be kind of pushed into there that you would probably have. Yeah,
I mean, I certainly hope so. I mean, that is my job is to facilitate it, keep it going, and bring in, bring into the discussion just to really get them thinking about, what they want moving forward in terms of how to be the best, whether it's breaking down how they recruit, how they evaluate players, how, they're putting their practice plans, I mean, all that kind of stuff. And it would be the same in the corporate world. I mean, how they, just defining, what matters and what kind of people they're after and, all those kind of things that, again, if you don't really get clear on how you want, it'll happen. It's going to happen over time. It's just, are you going to, really get clear on what you want?
Yeah. And with a sports team, you have essentially a very short amount of time to get your shit together, right?
Absolutely. It's quick. I mean, there's no downtime for these guys at all. None whatsoever.
Yeah. And when you're talking college sports, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I do a little bit in the high school world, but but 95% of it is both men and women's pretty high level college sports teams.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're talking a school level sports team, you're talking new people too every year.
Yeah, that even adds to it. I was talking to a coach and they said, let's take college baseball. They carry roughly 36 people. Well, every year there's about 15 new ones. I mean, if you had a company that turned over, 40% of its employees every year, you'd be thinking, what the hell's the matter with this company? But it's just part of the nature. So so keeping that culture wheel, spinning in the right direction is, really, really important.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that's something I always think about when you see an organization, a sports team like in the NCAA that's successful for many years, like more than 4 years. You're like, what are they doing? And I think that, you know what I mean? It's got to come down to coaching. It's got to come down to culture. And it's got to come down to people being able to assimilate to that culture rather quickly, I would imagine.
No question. I think one of the things that all these coaches want and, that they're looking to develop is kind of a players holding each other accountable. That's kind of a big element, I guess, or a foundational piece that I definitely hear from all the coaches. How do we get these guys to hold each other in the locker room? I just saw recently, I think it was on Twitter or where it was, but they were talking about the Alabama football program, and one of the assistant coaches said he knew the culture because you were talking about success over a long period of time, which they're pretty successful recently there at Alabama. Right. But he talked about how he said, I knew the culture really shifted when he said he walked into the weight room and he overheard one of the players say to another player, "That's not how we do things around here." And he said that's kind of trick that the players were getting it. They were taking that on themselves to hold each other accountable so the coaches don't have to deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's something also, too, even from professional sports level that I've always looked at, like within, like, let's call it the New England Patriots, right? For them to be successful for that amount of time, there has to be such a hard, fast culture in there that people just either get or don't. And I think you read that a little bit, but
No,
Just speculating.
I would say you're spot on. I was just I don't know if you're familiar with the book Ego is the Enemy. That's one that's come across your list lately. Anyways, got any Ryan Holiday. He also did that. The Obstacle is the Way. Pretty popular books in recent memory. But anyways, in the Ego is the Enemy, there's a story about the New England Patriots, and it talks about, of course, the the infamous draft pick, which most people say is the greatest pick in the history of the NFL.
Right.
Mr. Brady. But what I found fascinating about it was that it talked about, how the media, proclaims that best pick ever, blah, 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 blah. But the culture in the Patriots organization was that, number one, they make the pick in the drafts in April. And then, of course, they go through the next season. He doesn't play at all. And the next season's when, Bledsoe gets hurt. Brady comes in and plays. And they kind of realize what they have. And rather than getting all caught up and patting themselves on the back in terms of, hey, look how awesome we are, their first question internally, back to what kind of culture they have, was, how did we miss that badly? How did we think a guy that we took in the 6th round that's this good? Like, what's the matter with our player personnel scouting? How did we miss that badly?
Right. Okay.
Rather than getting all caught up in what everybody else was all caught up in, and which again goes back to cultures. How do we get a little bit better? So they just went and kind of tore the whole thing apart. And we're like, we can never miss like that again. Matter of fact, there's a great part of the story that talks about Scott Pioli. He was the director of player personnel for the Patriots. And after that, he's not with the Patriots anymore, but he used to keep a picture of a player on his desk. And I think a lot of people think, well, of course it was Brady, right? Greatest pick ever. And it was a guy named Dave Stachelski or something like that. And everybody who the hell's Dave Stachelski? Well, he was the guy they drafted in the 5th round.
Okay.
So yeah. It was kind of a reminder to him of, hey, you're this close to success, but you're this close to failure at any moment, and you better remember to stay hungry and stay humble, and so just kind of a reminder to himself of, hey, this is how close you were to missing out.
Yeah, and you see a lot of times, and I don't know if it's Belichick making the call or whatever, but they'll take players that are seemingly average on other teams, but they fit that culture piece so well that then they become really successful. And I think you even see those players now taking pay cuts to stay part of that successful culture, just because I feel like people are starting to know what they have.
I agree with you 100%. When you got guys wanting to play there, I mean, now you've, and when let's kind of umbrella that back into some of the stuff we've talking about, whether that's a company or a college sports team or a pro sports team, when you got people that want to be there, you're all of a sudden kind of, you're in the right direction, put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll ask you one more question and we'll move on from the Patriots.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because I've been looking at it from an outside standpoint for so long. Do you think that obviously culture's top down, I think, at least in my speculation. Do you think it's coming all the way from Kraft? Do you think he's the greatest organizational owner? Or do you think it's Belichick? Or you know what I'm saying?
Good question. I got to believe that somewhere in there, Kraft's a smart enough guy to get the right people and then get out of their way and let them do their thing. Mm-hmm. That's what it looks like from the outside standpoint. And then he goes and gets people, but then which I think great leaders do. They know their skill sets, and then they find other people that do, those other things well. So, I mean, I guess ultimately starts with him and making those kind of decisions in terms of people, but then, getting the right people in there too. Because Bill Belichick certainly doesn't strike anybody, in terms of the way he appears, his appearance, by appearance, I don't mean just the way he looks, I just mean the way he talks, everything.
Yeah.
He's not strikes you as like some, charismatic leader, which a lot of times, that people think you got to be that to be great at something. It's like, no, that guy just, he does the little things, and he was the guy that decided I'm going to be better at film than anybody else ever was. And, that was that thing that nobody liked to do, was review film. And he was like, I'm going to be really good at it, and I'm going to love it. And, Brady, I've read the same stuff about Brady. He was kind of the same guy. He just studies it harder than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to, looking at the broader picture, when you look at organizations, something I would say, even like from an entrepreneurial standpoint, something really successful entrepreneurs do is that they surround themselves with the right people all the time. And I would say that's probably even a better skill than having a hard skill yourself.
Absolutely. It's almost that, in a way, it's a little bit of being vulnerable, meaning that I don't have all the answers. I maybe don't know how to do this thing the best, but I can find the right people that can do it. Mm-hmm. And that, for because how many organizations, since we're just talking NFL, how many NFL organizations have gone through a thing where a couple egos got in the room and blew the thing up because they couldn't get along?
Yeah.
The San Francisco 49ers had a pretty good thing going a few years ago, and then you had an owner a GM, I think it was the GM, that had a big ego, and of course Harbaugh's got a big ego, but they were winning. And I promise you the 49er fans right now would gladly take Harbaugh.
Yeah.
if they were still winning.
I think they'd take Alex Smith too.
Oh, yeah, you think? Yeah, they'd be very, very happy to have that guy back.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like knowing yourself and being vulnerable, this ties into the next question that I had, which is, how do you think being self-aware contributes to your success? Because that's something I see you talk about a little bit on your website.
Yeah. I'll steal from I claim this quote. I don't know if anybody else ever said it, because now it's really hard these days to track down who actually said something.
Right.
It's damn near impossible to figure it out.
Gandhi said it.
Yeah, exactly, right. But I do have a belief that says, and it's really this thing that you can't lead other people till you can lead yourself, and you can't lead yourself until you can know yourself. And when this kind of goes back to something we talked about very early, that once I started to get a little bit of insight into this awareness of me, and I realized what it did for me, kind of just being aware of myself, what makes me tick, what I like, what I don't like, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. It opened up like a whole new world. I don't know if that makes sense. I know that's being very, I don't know what the right word for it is, but
it's like esoteric, but you're seeing yourself for the first time, right, in a different lens.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so that was I think for me, it was such a powerful thing for me that it kind of starts to become everything that I speak about. I mean, anything that I go and talk to a group about, whether it's going and doing a keynote, for an hour, for whatever, for a company or an organization, or whether it's doing one of these trainings like we're talking about to get with some people for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, a lot of that comes out because I think that's another one of those kind of like foundational pieces, that the more aware people are, the more aware I am of myself. It influences everything that we do, every decision that we make, every behavior that we have kind of starts with that self-awareness of ourself and of myself.
Yeah, you definitely, in order to get anywhere, right, you need to know where you are currently.
Yeah, and sometimes that takes, being like brutally honest, really, really honest with ourselves about, again, when I think about, I just, what I love about this show, I mean, I went and listened to, several of the episodes so far, and what I heard in there, a ton of it was, it's kind of this success leaves clues. And when I listen to successful people, that's one of those foundational things. They seem pretty self-aware of themselves and aren't afraid to like ask the tough questions and face the tough questions, and that helps them grow. That seems to be a foundational element, at least a lot of people that I consider successful people.
Yeah, without a doubt. Something I've seen in the past is like, I would say one of the most crippling things toward success is having like an entitlement mentality, feeling like maybe somebody owes you something. Sure. And if you're not self-aware, it's very easy to develop that mentality.
Good. Yeah, that's a great point. And you see that a lot, where they all of a sudden, this is owed to me, or somebody should have done this for me, or, this thing should have happened. And, rather than saying, hey man, what could I have done about that? I mean, I was talking to my grandpa, he kind of understands what I do. He's 87 years old, and he used to work for the telephone company forever. And he gave me kind of an analogy. He said, if somebody got in an accident, he said, no matter, because you come out, whose fault was it? Well, it was somebody else's fault. But they literally broke it down to, but what could you have done to it, even if it wasn't your fault? Mm-hmm. What could you have done to avoid the accident? And even to the point where he said a guy one time was parked and he was inside doing something, and a guy came around the corner, it was icy, and slid his car and hit the car. And the guy's like, what do you mean, what else could I have done? And they're like, well, if you looked at the corner, you realized there was ice, maybe you wouldn't have parked there. Really thinking down to that detail, that there's always something else that the person could have done.
Yeah, I think people by and large don't like to face that fact because it's scary.
It's very scary. I mean, right. It goes back to that one of my favorite of all time TED Talks is the one by Brene Brown on vulnerability. And she talks about, in her mind, she uses the term people who live wholeheartedly and who kind of embrace vulnerability. I mean, again, you talk about things that terrify people. Being vulnerable would be right up there on the list. I mean, even that word for most people, you mention it in the room and you just watch everybody go, I don't know about this. Mm-hmm. But again, I mean, people, I talk to athletes about it all the time. And, because in sports, so much of it's like, hey man, we got to go and we got to put that tough, confident face on, even if we're not feeling it. And yet I talk to them like at the same time though, when you go ask your coach for help, or in a business setting, if you go ask your boss for help, that's being vulnerable. Like kind of saying, hey man, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. What kind of, can I get some help? All tough questions to ask.
Yeah.
But be really, really beneficial too.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people that listen to this, I think probably because once you get to be an adult, it's a lot harder to compete in a team sport. So I think a lot of people are probably more like individual competitors, like CrossFit, runners, powerlifters, whatever. And when you start, you have to own the blame too, right? And I think that's what really starts to scare people is anything that happens that's good is going to be on your shoulders. But when you have to be really honest with yourself, that means you've also got to own the stuff you fucked up.
Right. I mean, that's again, man. We were talking about people that I consider successful. And that'd be another one of those, man. It's those type of people that are like, hey, man, I blew it. I own it. No excuse, no story, no justification. My poor kids are getting raised in that world of, just say I'm sorry and we're done. Like that's all I need to hear. But let's not do a story and some lame, reason about why it happened. Just here's what happened. I blew it.
Yeah. Yeah. Own it and move on. And those people are typically successful in the workplace too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can start to see the translations. I mean, I don't know where I got this phrase, but it's a great question. It's where else in your life does that show up? Because people that were doing it at 20 are probably still doing it if, because one of two things happen. Do they continue the pattern, or, life will come along and freaking throw a haymaker at you, and you're like, damn, I probably should pay attention to that behavior, that habit that I've got going now.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they're talking about the generation that's growing up right now, they talk a lot about the entitlement mentality and stuff like that. And it's kind of weird because it's like, are you trying to, do we want to prepare the world for the kid or the kid for the world, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. That's a great, I haven't heard it that way before, but you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
It seems like we're trying to prepare the world for the kid a lot more these days.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, no, you make a really, really a good point.
But that's one of the reasons that I love sport in general, whether it's fitness or whether it's team sports, is like there's so much translation to regular life, like you mentioned. Yeah,
there's always that correlation there. I mean, why do people continue? My son's my 3-year-old son's in this little ninja class, and there's a couple people that are in there, and that you can tell they're into. I've heard them talking. They're into CrossFit and body, training and things like that. And it's like, why? Because that competitive, those little competitive juices, like it's not like they go away.
Right.
We're still, competitive. So now how do we do it in another element? And some people do it in the business world, but it's all those behaviors and stuff, show up in other places.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely can learn some life lessons on the field for sure.
Right. Right.
So what is the uncommon oath? I saw that on your website.
The uncommon oath. So, the what it is, the real simple answer is that it's with some of the sports teams that we work with. We've only done that in the sports arena, but kind of back to the, you hear a lot of coaches say, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And, you alluded to this earlier. Okay. So we've talked about this but so how do we actually do that thing? So this is one of the processes that we use where they are given, it's 100 and I think it's like 150 words or something like that. And it's a phrase and it talks about kind of their commitment to the team and they have to memorize it. But that's really all they know till we get there. And then kind of one of the way the event, I guess, or the program finishes up is that each one of the players gets up in front of his whole team and delivers that. But not only do they have to deliver the words, they've got to deliver it with what we call level 10 passion and energy, which means like putting so it's like it's just like total like out of body experience, but and a lot of people, I don't know where you saw it or read that, but it's kind of why some of that stuff doesn't make it to video or on my website, because people see that and they think, oh, this is one of those like rah motivational things. And it's like, that's like the last thing that's about. I mean, it's about getting out of our comfort zone and allowing our team to support us and giving everything that we've got to something, which again, that thing that we were just talking about. I mean, every one of those is a life behavior that I think successful people have.
Yeah.
Successful people give everything to things. Successful people get out of their comfort zone. Successful people allow other people to support them. You know what I mean? So but that's what it's about. But it's a crazy, intense, like kind of over the top process that
Okay, so you use it as a tool to like foster all these other characteristics, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that it's kind of part of what they do. Several of the teams, one of the teams we've got, I mean, they've got like the actual words mounted on the wall, and it's kind of part of the culture. Like, this is how we do things around here. One of the phrases that is putting the needs of the team above my own, which is really, really tough. And again, not just in a sports setting, in a professional setting. You think about things that go on in a company or a business, and a lot of times it's because somebody's being selfish. Somebody's really putting their own needs above the bigger picture.
So I'd imagine teams want to retain you then for another year, huh? So they don't have that plastered on another wall.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, we're always, like I said, we're back, whether it's the sports teams or the companies. I mean, we always say to them too that this isn't some like quick fix thing where we're going to come in and do something and then, because we don't want it to be, hey, some cool thing we did last year or some cool thing we did that one day. And I say the same things to companies. Don't look at it as a one-time thing. You got to repeat it every so often, or else it will just be a one-time thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a question for you, because this is something that takes you a while to instill in an organization. A lot of times as an adult, I'll relate it to CrossFit. So when I started competing in CrossFit, I was instantly on a CrossFit team, right?
Okay.
So if you're put in a team environment and you want to lead them to be successful with little time, what are some of the things that you can do essentially to try to build that quicker when you don't get to know them, for example, or when you have like 8 weeks to train or something like that?
Sure. So are you asking, like, if I go in and actually work with a team, is that what you're saying? Like, what would I do if I had a shorter?
Sure. Like if you were going to be put in that position, just because I'm thinking people that are listening to this that compete in more of like the adult sports leagues types things, they have shorter amount of time, but they still want to be a leader. They still want to do the right thing by their team.
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing the question right, I'm going to go back to the thing that we talked about. I mean, kind of what in any of those group environment like that would be, go back to the relationship development, because I'm also a big believer that when people feel like they can actually like truly be themselves, we tend to perform a lot better at whatever that is, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's being in the business, whether it's on a college sports team, when we can really feel comfortable with who we are. And a lot of people don't fully feel comfortable with who they are.
Sure.
At various levels. I mean, you walk in, let's take this CrossFit. So you walk into this team. Let me ask you a question. So how many people are on the CrossFit team that you were talking about, roughly?
6, 3 guys,
okay,
3 girls.
Yes, it's a smaller team. So in that setting, because now we've got our own, whether is this person better than I am at this thing, or the self-talk gets going and all the internal BS gets going, and so now we're not really being ourselves. So if you said, hey, what would you do for a short time? I would come in and focus on simply the relationship development so people can feel comfortable being themselves, because that plays such a big role in how we perform at things when we feel truly comfortable being ourselves.
Yeah, sure. What are some of your thoughts on leadership, like within the team environment?
Well, that's a good question.
So like success, I think leadership is a very abstract thing that's hard to kind of put terms on.
Yes. So I'll start here anyway. So let's use, just because we're talking sports right now, and then we'll maybe elaborate into other areas. But what I see with a ton of athletes is it's easier to find the athletes that are what I call kind of the by example type person. In other words, they will go and they will do the thing and they will work hard at it and they'll be good in the weight room or whatever. That's not that when I say easier to find, I'm not saying that it's not really, really important or that it's not tough to be that person, but on the global scale, that person's easier to find. Then there's the other spectrum of what I call kind of the more vocal leader, the person that will actually say something, that will actually kind of call people out, that will hold people accountable. And, and there's some certain like little kind of caveats that got to go in there. I mean, if you're going to be one of the better athletes, the better workers on the team, then actually use your voice. So that's the harder one to find. But I think in terms of a setting, it's really, really important. I think the best kind of leaders, whether it's of a company or a sports team, they can kind of do both. They're not only the hardest worker, but they're also not afraid to say something when it's actually needed to hold people accountable, which, again, that's scary, because it's that, what if people don't like me? What if people don't like what I have to say? What if they don't, you're dealing with all that as well. But that's a really, really important part. If that, that's kind of the shorter answer, but in terms of those two components are really important.
Yeah, sure. And I like the common themes that we're kind of like pulling up here when it comes to success, like accountability, right? Like whether that's yourself or your team, like holding yourself accountable. Again, that's something very hard to do, but definitely common among successful people.
Yeah, very, very common. So so even given a specific one, whether it's a company or a group, sometimes we'll take them through like we call it a feedback process, and we'll literally allow them to give both positive feedback, and we like to call it feedback for improvement, and kind of teach them a language and a way to say it, so that it doesn't become a personal attack. It's one of those things that, we've all been a part of a conversation that didn't go all that well when somebody was giving, usually it's feedback for improvement,
right.
Into kind of a mess. So we wanted to give them kind of an avenue on there and kind of teach them, hey, here's a way to do it. Talking about the behavior, talking about the impact. Here's a suggestion. And so there's actually a communication taking place between people, which, that starts to, kind of build on the, if you've read the Patrick Lencioni, he's got the book about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and he talks about that foundational levels, the trust. I mean, which I know again that's one of those words that gets thrown out there, but at that bottom level, if there's not some trust there, basically what you get is kind of this false. It's a false connection. People don't really connect, and then you can't even move up to the next levels until that's actually built.
Do you think that leaders are born or made?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think some people certainly have some skill sets that just kind of come through life's experiences, things that they've done, things they've experienced as they're growing up. But then I do think there can be some things that can be, trained on and taught to and worked on if a person really commits to it. I mean, this leadership thing is one of the things everybody, at least I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people say, I want to be a leader of this or of that or on top of it. And then they get there and it's like, wow, this is a lot of freaking hard work.
Yeah.
This is a really tough thing to do. It's not easy. So yeah, I would say it can be a little bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think that's really what would start separating people is once people start getting exposed to the actual amount of work that it takes to be good at something. And I don't mean just reps, I mean focused reps. You start separating the herd.
Bingo. Yeah, it is the whole 10,000 hours thing. Well, your 10,000 hours might look a lot different than my 10,000 hours if I'm unfocused and you're focused, and there's a great separation there. So the time of experience and, like you said, how you actually do it is paramount.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it to myself with different things that I've started doing, and I like you'll find out quickly whether you like the idea of something or that thing actually resonates with you when you have to start putting in the real work required.
Yeah, it's kind of like starting like a CrossFit program or something like that pretty quickly. Like, do I like this? Do I like to go do this thing, or do I like the idea of doing this thing?
Yeah, the big one you see a lot, and we've talked about it on the show, but it's like people, when you get involved in CrossFit, to get involved, there's a low barrier of entry, right, as there should be. But to go to the CrossFit Games, right, those are very different. Although you can sign up to try, the barrier to entry is low. When people start getting into that like 6 hours in the gym and you start like sacrificing friends and all of these different things, it's like, okay, shit, no, I'm trying to be a pro athlete right now. And that's a very big difference.
Yeah, I can see that being a huge dose of delayed gratitude.
Yeah.
Which is, like, let's put all that aside for this thing I want at the end. We were talking earlier about kind of this generation, I guess, that's coming up. And I think that's one of the biggest things they struggle with is they've been brought up in a world of everything's right now. I can have it right this second, whatever I want to eat. I don't have to wait for anything to pay for it. I can put it on a credit card. I mean, the lifestyle that they've been thrown into is, and honestly, personally, I don't think it's their fault. I mean, it's just kind of this, it's not just because of kind of the way the world is right now. And I don't want to blame the world or anything like that, but they've got some things to overcome to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's like when you look at childhood obesity or anything, right? They're just living in the world that we created, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it was like stuff that was well intended. It just didn't have the long-term impact that we hoped that it would.
Right. And that's part of the problem with, consumer culture and capitalism and, for all the great things, like there's this side where it's like, if you just gobble everything up with reckless abandon, you're probably not going to like where you end up.
Bingo. Right. And all of a sudden you just end up there. You didn't plan it. You didn't want to be there. You just, oh crap, how'd I get here?
Right. Are you familiar with the marshmallow test?
Yes, with the little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly what they're dealing with.
Right. So, have you seen the teams that you work with that are more successful? Do they have, I guess, like a propensity to delay gratification more?
Absolutely. One of the things too that I've seen them do that becomes such a big thing, and it kind of goes along with this, is their ability to approach every day the same. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but meaning win, lose, however they played or performed the day before, the next day they look the same.
Right.
If I'm down there watching them play or whatever, and if I see them go through a tough loss the night before, and then I'll watch them the next day, and I'm like, can you tell that they had a tough loss the night before? And not that we shouldn't, not that shouldn't eat at us a little bit and drive us the next day, but in general, kind of show up so that it looks the same every day, or else because they're kind of trying to avoid all these highs and lows, and kind of stay in this main thing, which again, like you said, whether it's getting ready to prepare for a CrossFit thing or whether it's getting ready to prepare for a day at work, I kind of want to be in that same ready to go kind of routine mindset. So no doubt about it. And it becomes part of their, the other thing from these athletes that I think, they take into life that's so important is kind of having routines, and whether you call them routines, rituals, ways of going through things, ways to get themselves in the right mindset, ways to get themselves set to do something. I mean, that stuff is so critical. You think about going and doing I would almost guarantee you, if you start breaking it down and talking to CrossFit competitors, and you start talking about like what they really did to prepare themselves mentally for that kind of stuff, and it's something they've been doing for a long time, and it became a routine. It's no different than watching a batter step into the batter's box, and they got this little 3-second routine they got to get themselves ready and focused.
Yeah. Do you think being very succinct with what your why, right, or your purpose is, kind of helps with that mental piece?
Absolutely. It really is that little phrase of when we know the why, we can figure out the how, but it's got to be that kind of internal driving force there. And the other one I see him do that I think the best, athletes to get the most out of it too, are, a lot of people have a routine for getting ready to do the thing. What I don't see a lot of is people creating a routine that when shit goes sideways, what's my routine to get back to that good mindset? They spend all the time building the routine to get ready for the thing, but then when everything goes not the way we wanted it to go, now what do I do? Well, you got to have that bookend at that side of it too to get yourself back there, whether it's what the self-talk, what you think about. I mean, all that kind of stuff becomes really, really important too, because again, using whether it's the CrossFit thing, whether it's an athletic performance or it's in business, stuff's going to go terrible.
Right. So what would that look like? What do you mean by a routine to get back into the swing of things?
Perfect. So, let me use a sports one, and then we'll kind of expand on that. So, I was at baseball practice last season, Division I team, watching him, and one of their best hitters on the team, and I was watching him, and every time he'd step into the box, he had this. It was such a dialed-in routine in terms of like you see a lot of college baseball players. They hold the bat, look at the bat, take a breath. They're probably telling themselves something. But I watched him, and I was like, I could go do that because it was so clear. I kind of break it down to like technical writing. I mean, I think we've all built something that had really good instructions, and we've all built something that had really shitty instructions that you're like, I can't follow this crap. Like I don't even know what you're talking about here.
Right.
Something that has really good instructions, like it's step by step by step. So that's a good routine. So I watched anyway. So I watched him do it. In other words, he could have taught it to me, and I could have done that routine. Like it was that, and it was every single time perfect. But what was interesting was, so a little bit later, there was practicing, and something happened, and I don't know. I think he was on second base, and he got thrown out at third. I don't know. But anyways, he was pissed off at himself, right?
Sure.
So I'm watching him come back into the dugout, and in terms of a 1 to 10 being pissed off, I mean, this was like a level 5. This wasn't like throwing the helmet or anything or having a temper tantrum, but you can tell he was frustrated, which he should have been. He made a dumb mistake.
Right.
So he went back out on the field, and when the practice got all over, I went over and asked him. I said, okay, I said, I talked to him. I said, hey, I could see your routine for getting ready was perfect. I said, what's your routine for flushing out that mistake? Like flushing it down the toilet and moving on. I said, when did you actually do that? And he was like, I don't really remember. He said, I kind of just forgot about it by the time I got out on the field. And I said, okay. I said, so here's what I want to work with you on. I want you to come up with as clear of a routine for flushing a mistake away as you have for when you step in the box. And I gave him a couple examples. I said, I don't care if it's you walk around the edge of the dugout and scream fuck as loud as you possibly can, and then you're done with it, and then you move back in. But now that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Or you sit there and process it in your own, because everybody does it differently. Some people can let it go quicker than others. I mean, there's no like perfect answer for this. You got to kind of find your thing. But I said, so I gave him some examples. I said, or maybe it's literally the moment you go back on the field, when you step across that white line onto the field, in your mind, you're like, flush it, done with it, whatever. But something that's an actual routine that you can follow every single time so that it doesn't just go away whenever. Because I said, the problem's going to be, this was practice. It kind of went away pretty quickly. What about when it's in a huge game in the 8th inning and you just ran your team out of an inning when you're still down by a run? Well, now you're going to really need that routine to go to, and if you don't have one, you're not going to be in the right mindset. Does that kind of answer it better?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, like a process to let go of whatever.
That's exactly what it is. It's a letting go of, or a flushing it, or a releasing the anchor, or whatever you want to call it. But it's exactly one of those.
Yeah.
And then you could expand that. I'm sure, man, when you're competing in CrossFit, there's stuff that doesn't go right. Mm-hmm. But then you got another event you got to go do.
Right. Yeah. No, I think I know I said I was going to stop talking about the Patriots, but you got to think 28-3, right? You come back in the second half and play like it's the first half, like that never happened. Like that is probably the most overlooked part of that entire game, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. They didn't even really talk about that, or it didn't come up that much. But yeah, you're spot on. Absolutely spot on.
Yeah, to not just be like buried mentally like that, that's pretty wild.
And I gotta believe it goes back to their process and their routine.
Sure.
They just kind of came out and looked, whether they were up 23, down 23, they just had the same approach. And it's so easy to talk about because rationally that makes sense.
Right. But
the problem is, it's the funny thing about, like, kind of in whether it's sports or just in life, we know rationally to do it, but then the emotions all kick in, which the problem is so much of how we feel is emotionally. Feeling confident or feeling ready to go is kind of some emotional feeling. So these two are always kind of at work. They're either working together or they can work against you. It just depends on how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the problem, that like human emotions are just such a shitty, unreliable construct to go off.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. But they're like so powerful and in the way. It really, now you're getting into the whole thing with how our brain works, and you're firing on that amygdala, and it's all like ready to fight, and
right.
Kind of push those fight or flight things. And so how do you deal with that, and how do you breathe into that?
Yeah, sure. When you work with high performers, what is there anything common that you see that holds them back?
I would say one commonality does go back to this piece of vulnerability, and what I mean by that is, so much has been taught in sports of, be tough and be aggressive and be on the attack and show no fear, and kind of that mindset, which I get it in the middle of the competition. I totally get that. And I talk to baseball teams or sports teams all the time. I'm like, I get it. I'm not talking about vulnerability when you're on the mound and you're having a meltdown. You don't need to show it there. But it does go back to that part of, we talked about it earlier, about willing to ask for help. Willing, really not just willing, but eager to take feedback. Mm-hmm. Eager to really like seek it out and like, hey, tell me how I can get better, and I want to apply this thing, and soaking that up and not taking it personal and not taking it like it's some attack or like something I did wrong. And but that is a common one because that takes that vulnerability, which is scary. It's uncomfortable to make ourselves a little bit vulnerable and ask questions and ask for help and seek that out. And and then the next step is so now you get these high level athletes, and a lot of them are really good at stuff. So now maybe they're given some feedback to try something new that a lot of times maybe they got to go like backwards before they go forwards, to use that little cliche.
Sure.
Maybe you got to break something down that's this old habit that before you can get here, you're going to get worse at something. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're a high competitive athlete, that's not very high on your list of cool stuff to do to get worse at something before you can get better at something.
Right.
Because number two, I've met very few really high competitive athletes that are super patient people. They're not exactly a patient group of people. So, which it works for them in a lot of areas.
Right.
It can also be a work against us.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think you touched on something that gets overlooked. When we look at these people doing great things, we think, man, they're talented, man, they're strong, man, they're fast, whatever this is. But we never think like, man, they're coachable. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, man. And you think about whether it's, again, now use those things that correlate. Man, if you were coachable as a player, you're probably going to be coachable working in a team environment. That might be a family. Someday you get a significant other, get married, whatever, there's going to be some coaching going on in that relationship.
Yeah.
helping each other, at least in my definition of a successful relationship, people that can have those kind of conversations, or in a friendship, or in a team environment, whether it's a sports team or a business or whatever, that coachability, and everybody says, oh, I'm really coachable. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sure you are.
Right.
Till you made a mistake or something, or it's right in the heat of the moment, or one of the conversations I do, whether it's I do this one in business a lot or with athletes a lot, is I talk about what's your Achilles heel for coachability, for being coached. What's that thing that can make it really tough to be coached? And some players will talk about, or people talk about, well, if it's not delivered in the right tone of voice, sometimes then they take it personally, or sometimes it's the timing of the whole thing. I've heard people, another common one is when they already know they've screwed something up, and then to be coached on it, sometimes they don't want to be coached in that moment. I always give the analogy of driving down the street, and I'll never forget as I was driving down the road, and I accidentally, I had my kids in the back, and I accidentally kind of swerved into the lane next to me and kind of got close to this guy, and then I was like, crap, I moved over, and I already felt dumb. I was like, God, I felt making a mistake, and as he kind of came by me, I was kind of going to give them the, hey man, sorry about that. Well, he was like, you bleepity, and screaming at me and pointing at me, and all of a sudden, man, I felt this, all of a sudden I was like, hey, fuck you, I was ready to have like an alter, I was like, I don't need any feedback. I know I messed it up. You don't need to tell me right now.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing. Like if you're a CrossFit coach or whatever, delivery matters,
Everything, man, and knowing the timing of it, knowing where, and now it gets back into the, kind of what I'll call kind of an older school coach, kind of the drill, the Bobby Knights of the world. They were kind of known for coaching everybody the same way. Yeah, that was kind of the thing. I'm gonna treat them all the same, and I understand the philosophy behind it. I get, and it had a lot of good outcomes.
Well, it probably worked in a different world too.
There you go. That's totally it. When you think about when a lot of those guys cut their teeth in coaching, the model for leadership was the military.
Right.
That was the model, right? So that's what they modeled. But then you look at a guy like Mike Krzyzewski, who came from that era, but he has transitioned into. And it's not that he's not tough on his players. Some people think, well, they're not. No, he's just as tough on his players. It's just a little bit different. And like you said, he might handle so-and-so a little bit differently, and he might talk to so-and-so a little bit differently. And he knows that a button for this kid is to reprimand him in front of everybody. So he's going to pull him to the side and chew his ass off to the side. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But knowing the players and the things. So yeah, whether you're coaching a CrossFit athlete or you're coaching a player or in the business world, knowing that the different people have different buttons and different, when it comes to being coachable.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson I learned. Like try coming out of millennial like you're in the military.
Right. Yeah, no, it is, man. It's like that they, I was talking to a coach about it, and I said, you think about their world. Think about the movies they watch and the music and all that stuff. It's so fast paced. If you go watch a movie these days, like there's no breathing point in the movies. It's just 2 hours of nonstop, just turmoil.
Yeah. They got to keep your attention.
Bingo. Yeah. So when when I tell a coach, when you yell at a kid, right, honestly, they tend to just tune it out. As opposed to taking, and not that you shouldn't do it. I had a really, really good coach tell me, he said his philosophy was, he said, I got 3 bullets every season, where I can just unload on the group or on a person. But any more than that, it gets kind of, Yep. Yeah, they just kind of tune it out.
Yeah, I agree. When I was going through selection in the military, that's something that I noticed that, like, even for myself, and I would consider myself to be pretty hard-nosed and thick-skinned or whatever.
Yeah.
But if instructors started yelling at me enough, I realized I got to the point where I'm just like, I'm not even trying to get feedback anymore or hear your feedback and execute. I'm just like, if I do this, will you shut up? If I do this, will you shut up? And you're just doing things, trying to make them stop fucking talking.
Right. Yeah. So now what? Yeah. Now you're learning not the thing. You're learning what to do to get them to shut up.
Right. Exactly.
Which isn't what is not. That's not the intended outcome. That's not what that person wants either.
Right. Terribly ineffective.
Yeah. Terribly ineffective. But yeah, you're right. I think these guys have. There's been a shift. And back to your question, what is leadership? I think that thing of being able to look and approach people differently, at least from my definition, I think that's a really, really key part. I believe that's what really good coaches, really good leaders, really good, role models and mentors can do.
Yeah, hell yeah. So the Lionheart Kicker, final question we try to ask every guest, and that is if you could give blanket advice based on the experiences that you've had and the things that you've done, and it were going to be translated to every language, and it were guaranteed that everybody in the world would hear your advice, what would you tell people?
I would tell them that no matter where you are in life, no matter what you're doing, number one is this: we're all in a place where we can get better and grow. I don't know if you can see it, but I wear a little reminder of that. I got a little white wristband on my wrist, and it's a reminder of kind of that white belt mindset. And it really is from that mindset of the martial arts of the beginner, which is that no matter what happens, no matter what situation I'm in, no matter what situation any of us are in, we can get a little bit better and grow from it. And, I think for me, that's been one of the biggest important things that I try to instill with other people as well, is that always put yourself in that mindset of the beginner, the learner, and be eager to learn every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. We had a guest a while back, George Briones, and he said, every day I wake up like I'm at the bottom of the hill. I'm at the bottom of the mountain, and it's time to climb.
No, it is exactly it. And having kids, man, I get to watch that with with their eagerness and excitement for everything. And it's a good reminder for me as an adult that, man, that's a choice to look at stuff and be excited about it or to not be excited about it. And if there's anything I've learned from life, that when I forget to be excited about stuff, life tends to come along and take that shit away from you. And then all of a sudden you'll be reminded of why that thing was so important to you, whether that's stuff, people, experiences, things. I mean, it's kind of what happens. I either make it a habit to be grateful for it, or life will come along and remind me, and it's usually not in the most pleasant way.
Right. Yeah, there's those that are humble and then those that are about to be, right?
Right. Yeah, I love that. I'd heard that before, but that's a perfect synopsis of that little statement. Yes.
Yeah. So for people that are listening to this and want to just kind of follow along with you and support your journey, how can they do that?
The easiest way is, like I said, there's the website itself is just teameliteperformance.com. And then, I'm kind of a Twitter person too, although I don't use it a ton, but it's just a way to communicate with people. And so I've got a site on there. It's just Team Elite PERF. Team Elite PERF is the Twitter site as well. So, when I just, put stuff on there that seems to be helpful for people or teams or people that I'm working with, and, follow up with them there.
Yeah, for sure. And you do work with organizations outside of sports too, like companies, whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a fair amount with, kind of what I call the corporate world and the educational world, and, people it's kind of that mindset of people that want to get better at something.
Perfect. Well, thanks for being on, man. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate your time, Rick. It was good to chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland